Hello, I'm awry Spratt, and I want to welcome people joining us this week on the Yoto podcast platform. Now, just so you know, most of the bedtime stories I tell here are standalone stories. But over the last year, we have been dipping in and out of the epic story of Odysseus, the hero from ancient Greek mythology. And this week, I'm going to be telling the second last installment of that tale. So if you can jump in right here, that'll be fine. I'm sure you'll pick it all up. But if you did want to go back to the beginning and start from the first episode, you can search back through the episodes. The first episode's called Odysseus, as told by Nanny Piggins, and it dropped on January 8th, 2025. Or you can go back and listen to any of the other episodes. You're going to find fairy tales, myths, legends, and mysteries. I hope you enjoy them all. Now let's get into it. Hello and welcome to Bedtime Stories with me, R.A. Spratt. Well, updates on what's happening here in Bowral. It's been very wet and miserable weather, but it has been sunny today, so I'm very grateful for that. Roger, the rooster that lives 2 doors down, I've named him Roger after my father-in-law because both my father-in-law and Roger the rooster, so that's Roger, my father-in-law, and Roger the rooster, they both like to get up at about 4 a.m. in the morning. Anyway, as I was telling you in previous weeks gone by, I was horrified and I was wondering how long it would be before the neighbours started complaining. And I don't know that they have started complaining yet, but I have actually become dependent on Roger because he wakes me up at 4 in the morning, but sort of only like 20% awake. And then I'm lying there sort of drifting and I'm having ideas for my books and my podcast, and it's really good. And then when my alarm goes off at like 7:10, I'm like, yeah, let's go attack the day. And I'm finding it much easier to wake up. So I have discovered that having a rooster in my life is actually fantastic. So much so that the other day, Roger did not wake me up and I had to get up early. I can't even remember why, probably for like work or something. And he didn't wake me up and my alarm went off and I'm like, and then I was tired and I don't want to get out of bed. And I thought, oh my goodness, someone has had Roger evicted, or even worse, someone has eaten Roger. And I was really distressed and I went downstairs and I told my husband, Roger's stopped cock-a-doodle-doing. And my husband said, you're an idiot. He did cock-a-doodle-doo lots of times this morning. You just slept through it. So anyway, Roger's still with us. He's still waking me up and I'm very grateful. What else has been going on? All right. So we're halfway through the story of Psyche and Cupid, and I realised I'm not going to say I made an error. I may have just sort of slightly had an oversight, or maybe a little confusion. See, what I did last week was, so I'm doing the ancient Greek stories and someone requested Psyche. So I did all the research of Psyche, but I was in a bit of a rush. I had to do it all in one day. And my brain did not engage as it should have done. And I told the story of Psyche and Cupid and Venus. But Cupid and Venus are not Greek names. They're the Roman names. Now, all the young people listening are probably like, R.A. Spratt, what are you talking about? What have Romans got to do with this? I will explain. Personally, I have never studied ancient Greece or ancient Rome. I'm all self-taught, so I am prone to making mistakes such as this. But basically what happened was ancient Greece, when it was really powerful, that was before ancient Rome was really powerful. So the ancient Greeks had all these myths about Zeus and Hera and, all the ones I've been telling you. And then when the Roman Empire became powerful, that's like 100 or 200 years before BCE, 2,200 years ago, 2,300 years ago, they conquered Greece. That was one of the first places they conquered, and they loved all the ancient Greek myths. They thought the stories were fantastic, but they didn't like that they were about Greek people, so they changed all the names of the Greek gods to Roman names. So then they changed them to like Jupiter and Venus and Cupid. So I got a bit confused and used the Roman names instead of the Greek names. But I think you shouldn't blame me. I think you should blame the Romans because they created this confusion 2,200 years ago. So, I bear some responsibility, but I really think you should blame Julius Caesar and people like that instead because I'm doing my best. And also Cupid and Venus are easier to say, which, oh gosh, that's disrespectful to Greek people. But Cupid is more famous, so I thought if I started telling the story about Cupid, you'd sort of get an idea of what I was talking about. So the Greek name for Cupid was Eros, and the Greek name for Venus was Aphrodite. So, and in the things online I was reading about the characters, they swapped the names back and forth, so that was part of why I was getting confused. So anyway, now you know, so you can't claim I misled you. Well, I did mislead you last week, but I'm straightening it this week. So I'm just going to continue talking about Venus and Cupid for the purposes of this story. But if you know, I don't mind if you want to, every time I say Venus, yell at the device, Aphrodite. And every time I say Cupid, yell, Eros. That's fine. My only problem if I did, you know, if I was going to swap it to Eros is I'm not sure Eros had a bow and arrow. And then that's kind of pivotal to the plot. So anyway, let's just continue. As Nanny Piggins always says, don't let the truth and facts and reality get in the way of a good story. And it is a really crackingly good story. So let's get into it. The birds have been really noisy in my garden. And so if you're overseas and you're wondering, you can hear those birds in the background. Obviously, it's not Roger the rooster. I think that's currawongs you can hear. That sort of melodic kind of sound. That's a currawong. Okay, let's get into it. Here we go. Psyche, Part 2. The World's Meanest Mother-in-Law, as told by Nanny Piggins. Derek, Samantha and Michael sprinted home from the bus stop, partly because the bus driver was angry with them for playing marbles on the floor of the bus. In case you're wondering, marbles played on the floor of a moving vehicle is much more challenging than when it's played on fixed ground. It adds an extra layer of strategy when you have to allow for the bus going up and down hills. Also, the wads of gum and other disgusting detritus dropped by the young passengers onto the floor causes obstacles for the rolling balls. Samantha won the match primarily because Barry Nichols had dropped a big wad of gum next to the jack. Her best marble had rolled into it, and the combination of gum plus Barry Nichols' saliva ensured that her marble wasn't moving anywhere, not without the aid of a chisel and some industrial-strength solvents. Really, marbles on a bus seems like a harmless pastime for energetic children. It certainly requires a knowledge of physics that would challenge many college professors' grasp of the subject. The problem was that when the bus driver came to tell them all off for crouching on the floor instead of sitting on their seats, he slipped on a marble and landed hard on his backside. Now, rest assured, falling did not physically hurt the bus driver, but it did hurt his dignity. And it is hard enough driving a 10-ton bus with 70 youthful passengers at the best of times, but when they all burst out laughing at you, it was just too much to bear. The bus driver ordered the green children to get off his bus. Luckily, it was their bus stop, so they were actually running down the steps to get away before he could even get the words out. So that was the first reason they sprinted home, because the bus driver was chasing after them. But the main reason they sprinted home was because their nanny, Nanny Piggins, the world's greatest flying pig, had promised to finish telling them the story of Psyche, the ancient Greek goddess of the soul. "Nanny Piggins! Nanny Piggins!" cried Michael as they burst in through the front door. "I'm in the kitchen!" called Nanny Piggins. The children ran down the corridor, threw open the door to the kitchen, but they could not see their nanny anywhere. "Where are you?" asked Derek. "Here," said Nanny Piggins. Her voice was muffled, but definitely from somewhere nearby. "Where?" asked Samantha. Just then the refrigerator door banged open and Nanny Piggins stepped out. She was dressed from head to toe in ski gear and carrying a mixing bowl. "What were you doing in the fridge?" asked Michael. "Making ice cream, of course," said Nanny Piggins. "I would have made it in the freezer, but when you climb inside, there's not enough elbow room to stir. It really is an oversight on the part of the manufacturers. After all, I'm a petite pig. How are people of more generous build supposed to make ice cream?" With an ice cream machine," suggested Derek. "Piffle," said Nanny Piggins. "Anyone who has the patience to get on a bus, go to a department store and buy an ice cream machine clearly does not love ice cream. If you needed to sneeze, would you get on a bus and go to the supermarket and buy a box of tissues before you sneezed?" "No," said Michael. "I don't have that much control over my sneezes." "Exactly," said Nanny Piggins. "You just run to your father's office and sneeze onto one of his law papers that was just lying around. It wouldn't be pleasant. Those documents are never hygienic. But you would make do. Well, it's the same with ice cream, which is why refrigerator manufacturers need to put more thought into their designs. I thought it was dangerous to get inside a refrigerator, said Samantha. What if you can't get out again? That is a concern, said Nanny Piggins, although modern refrigerators don't actually lock anymore, but safety is important, which is why I always take a sledgehammer into the fridge with me whenever I step inside. It's also handy if you need to smash up a slab of toffee while you're in there. Derek opened the refrigerator and saw that his nanny was not exaggerating. There was a sledgehammer in the vegetable crisper. Nanny Piggins certainly didn't keep vegetables there. What's all this running and calling out about? Asked Nanny Piggins. The headmaster hasn't tried to give you report cards again, has he? No, I don't think he'll be trying that again, said Samantha. Not after the last time you sent his mother a report card about his behaviour. He's been grounded ever since. We hurried home because we wanted to hear the second half of your story, explained Derek. Which one? Asked Nanny Piggins. The one about Psyche and Cupid, said Michael. Oh, that is a good one, said Nanny Piggins. My poor cousin Psyche. Imagine how hard it must have been for her, having to deal with all those Greek gods and living in a time before the refrigerator had been invented. It's no wonder she's still remembered as a tragic figure. You just got up to the bit in the story where her sisters bullied her into seeing her husband's face, and when she realised she wasn't married to a hideous monster, but in fact Cupid, the god of attraction, she was so shocked she spilled burning hot oil on him. Ah, yes, said Nanny Piggins, that is a good bit. Then her beautiful house disappeared, and she was transported on the wind back to a barren field on her father's farm. Yes, indeed, tragic, said Nanny Piggins. It wasn't even a cacao farm, so it's not like she could comfort herself with a nice chocolate snack when she got there. So tell us, what happened next? Asked Derek. Oh, you'd better fetch spoons, said Nanny Piggins. Why? Asked Michael. Are you going to teach us how to play spoons on our knees again, like old-timey vaudeville performers? No, you're going to need to eat this ice cream, said Nanny Piggins, setting the mixing bowl on the kitchen table where they could all reach. Because the tale I'm about to tell you is so tumultuous, you'll need high blood sugar to be able to cope emotionally. So the children all fetched themselves spoons, dug into the big bowl of ice cream, and Nanny Piggins began her tale. Psyche was naturally devastated, began Nanny Piggins. She had just lost her home, her husband, and most tragically of all, the cake her husband had baked. She'd been saving a particularly delicious slice of chocolate mud cake for them to share as a midnight snack. So she was heartbroken and devastated, and worst of all, hungry. Now, when she got back to her father's farm, her sisters took her in. Well, that's nice, said Samantha. No, it wasn't, said Nanny Piggins. They only took her in because they were delighted that something dreadful had happened to her, and they wanted to hear all about it. When Psyche explained about being thrown out of her husband's house, they pretended to be sorry for her, saying things like, "Oh, you poor thing," and "Oh, that's terrible," and "Oh, why don't you go to bed early and get a good night's sleep?" But as soon as Psyche was out of the room, her sisters squealed and hugged each other with delight. "If Cupid's thrown her out, that means he's looking for a new wife," exclaimed the first wicked sister. "And that could be us," said the second wicked sister. Now, obviously, they didn't have Cupid's phone number because phones hadn't been invented yet. So they decided to meet him the same way Psyche had. But Psyche didn't meet him, said Michael. She'd been abandoned on a mountaintop by her father, and a wind swept her off to Cupid's house. Exactly, said Nanny Piggins. So the sisters reasoned to meet Cupid, all they had to do was climb the same mountain, wait for a gust of wind, and jump. No, said Samantha. Yes, said Nanny Piggins. But that's so silly, said Samantha. They were silly, said Nanny Piggins. Did it work? Asked Derek. Their plan? Asked Nanny Piggins. Oh, goodness, no. But gravity worked, and they plummeted off the mountain. I almost feel sorry for them, said Samantha. Even incredibly wicked people who betray their own sisters in the most dreadful way don't deserve to have that happen to them. You only say that because you don't have incredibly dreadful sisters, said Nanny Piggins. I have 13 of them, and I marvel every day that they don't get pushed off cliffs, said Nanny Piggins. Of course, Wendy has taken to wearing a parachute at all times because she enrages so many people. It's actually quite a common occurrence for her. So anyway, Psyche was now triply sad. She was banished from her husband's house, her sisters were gone, and her father had held a funeral for her and abandoned her to die on a mountaintop, so she was reluctant to go back and stay at his place. "What did she do?" asked Michael. "Psyche roamed the land, searching for her lost husband," said Nanny Piggins. "Really?" said Samantha. "Oh yes," said Nanny Piggins. "She roamed and wailed and wept. That was the way people did things when they were bereft back in the ancient Greek mythology days." Eventually, Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, noticed. "Oi, you!" Demeter called out to Psyche. "Could you stop crying? You're bumming out the sheep and the cows, and your tears are dripping all over the crops. Salt isn't good for plants. I'm trying to be the goddess of agriculture over here, and you're a real buzzkill on my hard work." "I'm sorry," said Psyche, "but I am devastated to have lost my husband." "How do you lose a husband?" asked Demeter. "I mean, a husband's not like a set of keys that can slip out of your pocket while you're at the theatre." "I was swept away by the east wind when I accidentally dropped burning hot oil on my husband's shoulder." "Oh, who's your husband that he's got the east wind doing his dirty work for him?" asked Demeter. "My husband is Cupid," said Psyche. "Oh," said Demeter, "so Venus is your mother-in-law?" "Yes, I suppose so," said Psyche, although he never spoke much about his mother. "I'm not surprised," said Demeter. "She's very beautiful, but also very angry." "Well, I never meant to hurt him," said Psyche. "I would do anything to make it right." "You'd better go and see Venus and beg her forgiveness," said Demeter. "Do you think that'll work?" asked Psyche. "Probably not," said Demeter, "but you've really got to stop ruining my crops and depressing my sheep, so it's worth a try." So Demeter told Psyche where to find Venus. "Oh, I've got a bad feeling about this," said Samantha. "Your intuition serves you well," said Nanny Piggins. When Venus was told that a young human girl had come to see her, she was shocked. When she saw that the young human girl was also beautiful, that just made her angry. "Why?" asked Michael. "The sight of beautiful people often makes other beautiful people angry," said Nanny Piggins. "It's got to do with cognitive dissonance." "What's cognitive dissonance?" asked Michael. "I don't really know," said Nanny Piggins. "I think it's got something to do with not eating enough cake." "Oh, great goddess of love, Venus, please forgive me for injuring your son with burning hot oil and secretly being married to him without your permission," begged Psyche. "But hang about," said Samantha. "Psyche didn't have any choice in the matter either. There wasn't even a wedding ceremony. The wind just picked her up and dumped her at Cupid's house, and the house told her she was married." "Samantha Green, are you being logical?" asked Nanny Piggins. "How many times have I told you never to apply logic to a story? It'll only ruin the fun bits. And that's especially true when it comes to stories from ancient Greek mythology. There isn't a word in the entire canon of ancient Greek literature that stands up to scientific, logical, or just common sense scrutiny, so stop ruining it for everyone by even trying." "Sorry, Nanny Piggins," said Samantha. "I don't know what came over me." "So what did Venus do?" asked Michael. "Did she punish Psyche?" "Of course," said Nanny Piggins. "The first thing she did was torture her." "Oh, no," said Samantha. "How?" "Venus forced Psyche to do maths homework and eat Brussels sprouts and listen to middle-aged men talking about torque and pistons." "Oh, that sounds awful," said Michael. "Wouldn't it be kinder just to hit her with a stick?" "Yes, but Venus didn't want to be kind," said Nanny Piggins. "She told Psyche she would forgive her and allow her to see Cupid again, but only if Psyche performed 4 tasks. And let me guess, they weren't easy like clean the car or rake up some leaves?" asked Derek. "No, Venus, like many of the Greek gods, had an imaginative streak when it came to cruelty," said Nanny Piggins. "She locked Psyche in a huge room full of tons and tons of seeds. There were barley seeds, wheat seeds, beans, and poppy seeds, all mixed together. And she ordered Psyche to sort all the seeds into separate piles by evening. It was an impossible task. Psyche tried valiantly, but after 4 hours of work, she'd only sorted out 1 ton of seeds. Psyche sat down and wept with despair. Fortunately, Demeter overheard, and Demeter didn't want her weeping over all those perfectly good seeds, so she sent some friends to help. Another god? Asked Derek. No, Demeter sent ants, said Nanny Piggins. Being the goddess of agriculture, she knew a lot of ants. She sent hundreds of thousands of ants streaming into the room, and they set to work carrying the grain into 4 separate piles. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Venus unlocked the door and found Psyche sitting in the middle of 4 perfectly sorted piles. Wonderful, said Samantha. That wasn't Venus's attitude, said Nanny Piggins. It only made her crosser. Now she had to think of an even more impossible task. So she took Psyche out into a field. That sounds nice, said Samantha. Where a flock of vicious, violent rams lived, said Nanny Piggins. I thought sheep were nice and fluffy, said Michael. Not this lot, said Nanny Piggins. These sheep had pointy horns, and they would headbutt and gouge anyone who entered their field. Psyche tried valiantly to shear them, but they just chased her around and around, poking her with their horns and ramming her with their heads. She had to swim across a river to get away from them. Then she sat on the bank and wept. But as she sat there, the god of the river appeared. "Excuse me," said the god of the river. "Could you please stop crying into my water? The fish that live here are not saltwater fish. You're not good for their health." "I'm sorry," wept Psyche, "but if I don't bring a golden fleece to Venus, I will never see my husband again." "Well, shearing a sheep isn't the only way to gather wool," said the river. "Bits of their wool gets tangled in brambles in their field all the time. If you just wait until the sheep are asleep at night, you can go around and pick up the lost bits of wool." "Oh, thanks, that sounds much easier," said Psyche. So that night, when the sheep drifted off to sleep, Psyche crept about the field, picking all their wool out of the brambles. Then she delivered a whole fleece to Venus. "And Venus was happy?" asked Michael. "Don't be ridiculous. Venus was only enraged further. Now she had to think of something even harder. So she gave Psyche a crystal goblet and ordered her to bring back a glass of water from the river Styx." "You mean the river in the underworld?" asked Derek. "The very same," said Nanny Piggins. "Wow, that sounds a lot harder than gathering up wool," said Michael. "It was," said Nanny Piggins. Psyche journeyed to the river Styx, but when she got there and she realised she had to climb a mountain to get to the riverbank, she burst into tears. She'd had a morbid fear of mountains ever since her father had left her to die on one. But this time she was saved by another god. "Which one?" asked Michael. "Can't you guess?" asked Nanny Piggins. "After all, Psyche was an incredibly beautiful woman. And which god do we know who's always quick to spot a beautiful woman?" "Not Zeus!" exclaimed Samantha. "The very same," said Nanny Piggins. "But he's such a rotter," said Samantha. "Actually, not this time," said Nanny Piggins. Zeus genuinely felt sorry for Psyche. He realised that Venus was being a bit of a meanie pants, so he sent an eagle to Psyche. The eagle took the crystal goblet from her and scooped up some water from the river Styx and brought it back to Psyche, so she was able to present it to Venus. "Let me guess, and that only made Venus madder?" said Derek. "Indeed," said Nanny Piggins. Venus was running out of ideas now. But since they were right there by the river Styx, Venus said to Psyche she had to go all the way into the underworld, talk to Persephone, the queen of the underworld, and ask her for a piece of her beauty. "How do you give someone a piece of your own beauty?" asked Samantha. "I don't know," said Nanny Piggins. "All I know is that Persephone did give Psyche a box and said, 'There you go, give that to Venus, and tell her hugs and kisses from me.' But Persephone was a Greek goddess too, and therefore not 100% trustworthy. So as Psyche was walking back out of the underworld, she began to worry if there actually was any beauty inside the box. So she decided to take a peek. "Oh no," said Michael, "it never goes well when you take a peek in a box in Greek mythology." As soon as Psyche lifted the lid just 1 millimetre, a cloud of darkness swept out, billowed around her, and put Psyche into a deep sleep. "Oh, poor Psyche," said Samantha. "She's having a really terrible day." Now, while all this had been going on, continued Nanny Piggins, Cupid was tucked up in his childhood bedroom at his mother's house, drinking chicken soup and regaining his strength. And as soon as he recovered from his burn, which he did completely and with no scar because he was a god and gods are lucky that way, he began to wonder, "Hey, where's my wife?" Now, Cupid had the advantage of having wings, so he didn't have to roam around weeping like Psyche did. He simply took flight and soon spotted Psyche asleep in a field. Cupid swooped down and awoke her. "With a kiss?" asked Samantha. "No, with an arrow," said Nanny Piggins. "You shouldn't kiss someone while they're asleep. That's just weird." "So he jabbed her with an arrow?" asked Derek. "Well, it worked," said Nanny Piggins. Then Cupid flew with Psyche to see Zeus and get him to sort out the whole situation. Zeus was very sympathetic because he often had romantic problems himself. "Yeah, tell us about it," said Samantha. So Zeus promised to help if Cupid helped him next time he had problems with a romantic relationship. Zeus called a big meeting of all the gods. He got them all together in one room, and he told Venus there would be no more torture or thinking up horrible tasks for her daughter-in-law. He then gave Psyche ambrosia to drink, which transformed her into a god too, and made her immortal, which meant no matter how hard Venus or her father tried to kill her, they wouldn't be able to. And finally, Zeus declared Psyche to be the goddess of the soul. Then he threw Psyche and Cupid a proper wedding ceremony, and they lived happily ever after. The end. Time for bed. "Wasn't Venus mad, though?" asked Michael. "Oh, yes, of course," said Nanny Piggins. But then Psyche gave Venus the greatest gift of all. Why did she give her a gift after everything Venus had done to her? The gift Psyche gave Venus was a grandchild. Psyche had a baby called Hedone. And Venus was so delighted to become a grandmother, she was slightly less horrible to Psyche from that day on. The end. Now open the refrigerator door. I'm going back in to make some more ice cream. The end. Well, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed that story. So until next time, goodbye. Hello, it's me again. If you enjoyed listening to Bedtime Stories with R.A. Spratt, it would be really helpful if you could like, subscribe, follow, and or review the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to now. Every little one of those digital affirmations helps, and the bigger this podcast gets, the more I can justify procrastinating from my real job to keep bringing these stories to you. Thank you.